Just in case you might have forgotten, the next blood moon on a Jewish feast day comes up on the 8th of this month, so day after tomorrow. We'll be talking more about that on that particular day and why that is so significant. In the meantime, we do have a DVD called The Sign of the Four Blood Moons. However, today, we need to look at the controversy that is raging, the tension that has been building between Israel and the United States of America, and in particular between Barack Obama and Benjamin Netanyahu. The two leaders have experienced considerable tension all during the Barack Obama presidency. Now, what's going on here? Let me just take you to an article. This article is from Israel National News. Noose tightens against Israel, tightened by Bibi and Obama. Now, Bibi is the nickname for Benjamin Netanyahu, and this particular article is contending that the noose is being tightened around Israel by both Netanyahu and Obama. Here's the article. How long will it take for Israeli voters to acknowledge that voting for any political party that aims to be in the present government coalition is a dangerous mistake? In other words, this particular person is saying all of the parties presently in power in the present governmental coalition are letting us down right now. The article goes on to state, I'm not at all surprised that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has done what he swore he would never do. Bibi has agreed to U.S. President Barack Hussein Obama and Fatah Abbas's demand that he agree to negotiate with Palestinians based on 67 lines. Now let's pause just a moment because there was quite a rift here a couple of years back when President Obama made a speech the day before Netanyahu was coming to speak before the U.S. Congress. And in his speech, President Obama said that negotiations should be resumed on the basis of 1967 borders with certain land swaps. Now, Netanyahu went to great extremes before the U.S. Congress to explain why that could not be the basis for talks between the Israelis and the Palestinians. However, it now appears that Netanyahu, through U.S. pressure, has moved to the position embraced by President Obama. The article goes on to state, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Israel Radio late Thursday that he had agreed to an American framework proposal whereby Israel would negotiate peace with the Palestinians on the basis of the 67 ceasefire lines with territorial swaps. This came from the Jerusalem Post. By doing this, he has removed not only Jerusalem neighborhoods like Givat Hamatos, Gilo, Ramat, and Pisgat Ze'ev from Israel, but he has also given the Arabs the right to expect Jerusalem's old city to be theirs. Okay, now let's remember today, what's the basis of all this? When the war broke out in 1967, it was triggered because Nasser was making preparations for war against Israel. The United Nations peacekeeping forces were along the southern border of Israel, the northern border of Egypt, and Nasser ordered them to leave. So they did. Now, they were supposed to be keeping the peace, but the peacekeepers are now ordered out by Nasser. Furthermore, Nasser just signed a mutual military pact between Egypt and Jordan, had long time had a pact, a mutual defense pact between Egypt and Syria. And then Nasser was making all kinds of speeches about driving the Israelis into the sea. Consequently, when the peacekeepers left, Israel realized that it was made up in the mind of Nasser to attack the nation of Israel. Now remember, the nation of Israel was only, 20 years old at this time, actually 19 years of age at this time. So you've got Israel surrounded totally by Arab enemies. And here it is, just 19 years of age. They had 600,000 population back in 1948. By 1967, I do not recall exactly what the population was. Okay, but nevertheless, it's important that we understand what this border issue is all about. Because when the armistice was struck in 1967, or actually the armistice was struck back in 1949, and that was the border between Israel and her Arab neighbors for the next 19 years up until 1967. Well, once Egypt removed the UN peacekeepers in 1967, that's when Israel made a preemptive strike against Egypt, swept all the way through the Sinai Desert, also swept all the way to the Jordan River, and also captured the Golan Heights. Well, there's been no peace since that time. The Arab neighbors said the three famous no's of Khartoum: no negotiation, no peace, and no recognition. So that was the stance of the Arabs. Well, there were resolutions passed by the United Nations over the next few months after the 67 war was over. And these resolutions called for Israel and the Palestinians to negotiate where the final borders would be. Now, this is the key phrase. It was understood that the borders of Israel were not defensible because Israel was 9 miles wide at the waist. So the United Nations, recognizing this, said that there should be peace negotiated between the two parties. They should negotiate where the boundaries should be between the two of them. Well, they have not been able to determine where the boundaries should be because the Palestinians have continually said you've got to return to 1967 borders, and also we must have East Jerusalem as our capital of the new Palestinian state. Well, Israel in 1980 annexed East Jerusalem, but because, of course, Jerusalem has always been the capital of the nation of Israel all the way back to the time of David in 1000 BC. So Israel does not even countenance the possibility of Jerusalem being the capital for any other entity other than Israel. It never has been and never should be. It appears from the biblical prophecies that it never will be. Okay, but there's been this continual pressure for Israel to withdraw back to the 67 borders. They keep calling this area the occupied territories. Now, you can't understand that phrase unless you know who controlled the West Bank and Judea-Samaria. The West Bank is Judea-Samaria prior to the 67 war. Was it the Palestinians? No. It was not the Palestinians. It was the Jordanians, because they had occupied the territory in 1948, 1949 during the War of Independence. So this was not Palestinian territory occupied. Now, to read all the news reports today, you'd say, oh yeah, this was Palestinian territory. Israel occupied it in 1967. Wrong, wrong, wrong. It's not the way it is. Go back, check your history. The Jordanians, when they moved on with 4 other Arab nations against the new nation of Israel in 1948, Israel declared its independence on May the 14th of 1948. The next day, 5 Arab nations invaded in an attempt to drive Israel into the sea. Now remember, Israel declared itself a nation because the UN had partitioned the land, the territory called Palestine, and both Israelis and Arabs were called Palestinians. So this was not the territory of a state called Palestine. There's never been such a state. So what happened was when they moved against Israel on May the 15th of 1948, That's what began the war. Israel, believe it or not, with only 600,000 people, won that war and expanded her borders slightly from what the UN had mandated. But the UN resolution had already been rejected by the Arabs, so it was of no consequence nor force anyway. Furthermore, the Balfour Declaration of 1917 had given the entire land to the Palestinians as a homeland for the Jewish people. Okay, now let's bring it up to where we are today. So, when the ceasefire finally was struck to end the 1967 war, Israel controlled all the way to the Jordan River. Israel controlled all the way up through the Golan Heights to the border of Syria and all the way down south. Now, Israel made peace with Egypt and returned everything that Israel had captured during the 1967 war. Now, this was quite a compromise on Israel's part because a lot of oil is out there in the Sinai, and Israel would love to have had control of some of that oil. Nevertheless, in order to have peace, they returned all the way. You know, the famous Camp David Accords between Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, which resulted in the assassination of Anwar Sadat, the president of Egypt at the time. So, now let's see if we can put all this together. So Israel had said all the time, we will not return to 67 borders because they're not defensible. We're 9 miles wide at the waist. You cannot defend it. Well, now then, slowly but surely, the pressure is on. And consequently, when President Obama, it was 2 or 3 years ago now, made his speech that negotiations should be resumed between Israel and the Palestinians on the basis of the 67 borders with certain land swaps. And that's when Netanyahu went ballistic. Well, that was about 3 years or so ago, but the pressure has continued on. The UN has now recognized Palestine as a non-member state. The European Union is putting pressure on. The United States is putting pressure on. Israel is facing pressure from every side. And now it appears that Netanyahu has caved in to the demands of President Barack Obama. Now, don't forget, though, with certain land swaps, now that's where the variable is. What will those land swaps be? Where will the final border be? That's the only thing remaining in question right now. And yet, Judea Samaria, is part of the Jewish promised land.